You alright, guys? Just thought I'd say hello. I'm Jack, obviously. Fucking thanks for listening to the show and that, mate. You fucking let me know what you think of it when you're done with it. Fucking send it to a mate, put it on your Instagram stories. It's probably one of the better ways you can share it with people. Leave a review, mate, if you're listening somewhere where you can leave a review. Otherwise, I'll let you get on with the show, mate. Yeah. You're right, guys. I'm the world around you, and this is Pause for Thought on Threshold FM, and this week we're going to take a little look at a guy that I think Chinese people would probably call Brother Chi, but in actuality we know him as Brother 12, because they're not letters, they're Roman numerals, mate. His mother, right, though she wouldn't have called him Brother 12, she called him Eddie, or Edward, or Ed for short, you know. Maybe, if the cartoon is to be believed, maybe she would have also called him Double D. But his full name, his actual name, was Edward Wilson, and he was a theosophist that was born in Birmingham in July 1878. And at least in the most recent time that we know of that he's been born, because he was also born sometime around the 18th dynasty of ancient Egypt, which puts him around 1300 BC, give or take a couple decades either way. I can't find out exactly which pharaoh he was, but he did have some form of relationship with Imhotep III, apparently also known as Akhenaten, which I guess is just the same as, you know, like fucking Jay-Z being known as Hova and as Sean Carter, but I can't be too sure on that. Anyway, let's have a song to start us off. This is Paper Plate by XII. I found out that Edward's dad was a manufacturer as well, so I started wondering if he could have been somehow responsible or played a part in the Wilson tennis racket's racket, but unfortunately, he had no ties to either the mob or to tennis. And interestingly though, the guy that was responsible for the tennis racket, he does have loose ties to the places that Edward Wilson was also associated with, which is strange, purely coincidental I think, but still pretty odd. His dad, though, was actually a bed maker, not like the ladies that snoop around your hotel room whilst you're out and about nosying around the town or at the local water park, but the sort that literally produces the bed frames. And I've also gone out my way this week, guys, because I took a couple of weeks off, which you may not have known. I took a couple of weeks off, and I thought I'd really put some time into this show as a little comeback, you know. So I've read through a collection of letters that Edward Wilson sent to his dad during his late 20s, and from that I learnt that his granddad was actually a pretty rich guy, and he invented some type of rifle, like what's it called, with the barrel where you pull it back, load the bullet in and push it forward again. Bolt action rifle, I think. And the military used it for tests for a few years, and then it got replaced by another rifle. But this granddad was obviously quite the businessman, because he held patents for lots of inventions, and he actually ended up with some form of royalty checks coming in from the rifles that his competitor had produced. And this money, right, that his granddad made and really worked hard for, ended up with Eddie's dad and uncles. And I'm pretty sure that's where Edward was getting a lot of his money from throughout his life, because considering he was earning about £2 a week at the time, I imagine to receive £200 in a single go off his dad seems fucking mental, and must have been an awful lot of money at the time. Because nowadays you earn what, like fucking a day, like what, 60 odd quid a day, and then to earn 100 times that would be to earn £6,000, so that's a big fucking jump there, innit? Anyway, long before Edward became Brother 12 though, he was, for want of a better term, mental, demented, weird. You know, some people seem to believe he had some form of tuberculosis, so I'm not sure if that can actually make you go a little bit weird in the head like Lyme disease can, but he did keep making mental decisions. But before we get into all of that, I'll give you some more of his background, innit? The earliest job that I can find Eddie having was as a dairy farmer, but he learned after a few months that milk cost a lot more money to produce than the money that it was brought in, so he just ended up sinking money into a farm that he couldn't make money from. It was his dad's money, but still. And his main idea with all of this endeavour was to establish a milk round off of the advice of another person who apparently also had a milk round in the same area. So he didn't acquire the business acumen genetically from his granddad, I don't think. I don't think he was switched on in a business sense. It's also worth noting that recently in the world, in England at least, over the past 10 years, we've been getting told, oh, milk's now not worth this, it's not worth producing. But this seems to have been going on since, the early 1900s, so that's not a new concept there. Is it just the media being really slow to pick up on stuff, or is it just when there's a slow news day, they're like, oh, fucking whip out the cows, show them the cows. Good stock footage as well, innit? Everyone's probably taken a picture or recorded a cow at some point. Anyway, with this dairy farm falling through, he had this other idea where he decided the best course of action would probably be to move back to New Zealand, which was a place where he'd recently married his then wife at the time, a lady called Marjorie. And as I said a minute ago, many believed he had tuberculosis and that he was mental. And that got me thinking, nowadays we can catch tuberculosis, or otherwise known as TB, from badgers. So I was wondering if it's where the saying "mad as a badger" could originate from, but I'm not too sure, and I didn't actually look into that. But he took his wife anyway. He took his wife and what I think was a very fucking really young child halfway around the world, away from both of their families, to live in what I've taken and what I seem to believe was a jungle at one point at least that he was living in. And he went there, he moved all that way to work an admin job for a company called Vines, Uttering and Purstan, which was some form of naval trading company, if you like. Maybe not naval, but basically definitely sea-based. They used boats to send stuff and trade stuff around the world. That was mainly operating in the South Seas of the world, so I presume that means the Southern Hemisphere. Now, I did also read somewhere else that he was actually a captain in the British Navy at one point in his life. Now, I read that and then couldn't find anything really about it, no real details about it. And it's hard to believe that he could have been a captain in the British Navy, because he'd always been suffering from what he describes in his letters that I read as violent attacks of ill health and also severe anxiety. But you could imagine that could be an effect of all of his time at sea, which would make sense if he wasn't always trying to get back on boats again. Because if you were, say you got some form of PTSD from being in the Navy, it's very possible it's going to happen to an awful lot of people. Even back then, it will happen to an awful lot of people. These violent attacks could be the tuberculosis, the anxiety could be from the PTSD, and this could have happened on a boat. But then, if that's the case, why is he constantly trying to get back on fucking boats and vessels? It just seems odd. There was a time as well where he, Marjorie, and the kid that he had at the time lived in this muddy hut, which was literally just not like a mud hut, just a hut that would fucking flood with mud. And that was whilst he was trying to sell rope, but again, not actual rope, this thing called flack, which they turn into rope, which he seemed to completely and utterly fucking detest it, innit, from his letters to his dad, but nowhere near as much as he hated his mother-in-law, mate. Nowhere near. He fucking hated that woman, mate. But I mean, it also seems that everyone else hated his mother-in-law. His parents did, Marjorie, his wife did, but he really fucking had it in for her. And he used to enjoy telling her in handwritten letters that he'd send her from halfway around the world, from New Zealand. And he seemed to really care about his wife, which makes it strange that he would really go out of his way to then wind up his mother-in-law. But I don't know, it was odd. And he was looking after his wife the best he could from his letters. He would discuss life and decisions with her, and he seemed to also consort with her to a degree as well, which, that seems quite forward thinking for a man of the early 1900s. He just didn't really seem to. He'd discuss them with her, and I presume she would discuss them back. I don't think she was just a fucking listening board, or is it a sounding board? Well, whatever, something you just fucking talk to. A brick, let's call her a brick. Marjorie the brick. I don't think Marjorie was just a brick with a face drawn on it, like in Ed, Ed and Eddie, except that's a piece of wood called plank. But either way, I'm getting lost. He didn't seem to think the things through that he was doing in his life, which seems quite odd for someone that would then later become someone that seems to have complete and utter control over a group of people. And he did, getting into that a little bit, he seemed to be a really religious bloke, and that could be a possible source for his dedication to his wife at the time, I guess, from his upbringing and that, But from the letters that I've read, religion in his life had taken a bit of a back step at this point when he was in New Zealand, as he very rarely went to church there, and he actually, in his letters, he was actually asking his dad to give him, and his mum, to give him information from the church. What has the church been saying? Has the church said anything new? Is there anything new I need to know about the church? He brought that up a lot. And it also seems that a form of depression in him grew as he became more and more focused on God later in the letters over a course of like 2 years. And he started to constantly obsess in his letters over God, calling him, but like him with a capital H. Now, an obviously intelligent man as well he was. He was a fucking smart guy, innit? To a degree, like, there was bits of it where you think this guy's probably not quite all there, but also, not really clever, but not that bright at the same time, I guess. He seems to keep putting himself into these strange situations and unusual jobs as well. So whilst he was a secretary for the rope business, he was also working almost, nearly double the allocated time, at least according to his statements in the letters. And this was more time than what he was ever paid for. And because he helped the business so much and got the business going and making it look good on paper, the owners sold it off, and because of that he lost his own job, so he did himself out of a job. So if there's a lesson to be learnt from this episode, guys, it's don't try too hard, especially for other people. Do a little bit more than minimum, and that's enough to get noticed. You don't want to do yourself in. Because all of this, him doing really well and helping them, that just fucking made him homeless again, halfway around the world, which was, by this point, I think the 3rd time he'd been homeless in New Zealand. And I say this because I don't know if it was the 3rd time he was homeless. It's hard to believe everything in his letters because there's so much obvious emotional blackmail in his letters at the time, and that's important as well because Brother 12, when he became Brother 12, he was fucking mad meat for the emotional blackmail. Now, even though he did fucking detest his mother-in-law, it didn't stop him from practicing this emotional blackmail on her in order to get more money out of her and in order to fund his and Marjorie's lifestyle. And it's worth noting too that no one knows what he was doing with all this money, because it was more than enough money for him to live off, especially with the wages he was getting. So we don't know where this money was going, what it was being used for. If he must have been receiving it, because in the letters he thanks them for it, but I haven't got a clue what he was doing with it, because he was ending up homeless, he was ended up with nothing. So I really don't understand where that was going, because each time he got it was an awful lot of money for the time. But that hatred between him and his mother-in-law, though, that was a two-way street. The mother-in-law saw him as a lazy man that wouldn't work. She didn't believe he had any illness at all and just thought he used it all as some form of excuse to get out of working. And where the money was concerned, there's a good chance the mother-in-law had reason to distrust him, innit, because he started to instruct his dad in these letters, later in the letters, to start talking in code about the money in any future correspondence between them. And weirdly, again, no one knows why. No one knows where that came from. No one really knows what the code quite was, because in the letters I read, it was quite obvious in his point, but when his dad spoke about it, I didn't see the letters from his parents. So reading his letters is kind of like reading a teenager's English exam if they've listened to what the teacher said and they reference the question. I'm taking it as he's referencing the letter in his answers and in his response to them. But yeah, we don't know why he was talking in code, what he was nervous of. So maybe someone was robbing the money, maybe he owed the money. But anyway, let's have a song. This is Dust in the Wind by Fat Father. From one of Edward's replies to his dad as well, we learned that his family have started to look down on him at this point, or that he's in the deep throes of in itself quite a deep depression, and he's interpreted their letter as some form of scathing review of his parasitic lifestyle. I mean, we can't be too sure about it, innit? Even though, the years change, right? And the years go by and the world moves on around him and that. He seems to be pretty adamant that he's been a little ill for 11 years consistently, which is strange because, as many of you will know, in numerology and conspiracy theories, the number 11 holds quite significance for a number, for different reasons as well, dependent on why it's being talked about. It's a number that refers to angels, for example, and Edward himself says that as a child he was visited by an angel, and that's just one example of the number's importance. There's in numerology and all sorts, it comes up a lot in conspiracy. Now, after receiving no money off a daddy for a while, he spits his dummy out and starts to talk about abandoning his wife and his now 2 children in New Zealand. Well, he's going to abandon 1 child and his wife in New Zealand. Then he decides against that, though, and he he says he did initially want to leave his 2 kids there with her, and then he decides against it almost in the letter, which makes it come across as emotional blackmail, because then he says, I'll take 1 child with me, and then he'll leave an ill Marjorie back in New Zealand with the other kid, the younger kid, and make them take a winter boat later in the year, and a winter voyage home, as quote unquote that'd be best, because that was his kind of mentality at this point. And then, fucking as if by magic, he does get some money, but it's only 20 quid in their money, a measly 10% of what he'd asked his dad for. So again, he sends a really long handwritten letter feeling sorry for himself about how he's let himself and he let his family down, like the boy at school with a pin, the inflatable boy kind of thing. It literally reads like that shit joke. Mostly, he claims that he's mostly fucking ruined their lives by draining all of the family's resources. And it's here where he really starts to fucking rant about the big quote-unquote him, God Almighty. As if that's all he can think about at the time. Or I was also thinking, though, that it could be because that's a good way to manipulate his very religious dad. And he then sends another letter 11 days later. See, there's that number again. He obviously knows the importance of the number 11. And it was on his 28th birthday to inform his family that floods have actually forced him and his family out of their home. And then during this time, he wrote this letter to his parents that was asking them not to send money. And obviously it was a don't send money, wink wink, nudge nudge kind of letter. Don't send money, but I do need money. But you shouldn't send money, but you should send money because I need money. And it shows his fucking true talent that this guy had for emotional blackmail. And if you give me a second, I'll read it to you. I'll read you a quote from his letter. Don't send me any more help, father and mother. I am almost choked with shame each time I get any money from you. As I remember how my debt increases, do nae send any capital, for I have nae confidence left in myself any longer, and would only lose it. If, as you say, you could help me onto my feet again with, say, £200, would it be possible to get a sharing and a place in a bedstead business? It is the only chance I ever had or ever shall have. Mind, I dinna want to ask you to try and arrange this. I know I have exhausted your patience and tried your faith too often. I hope you would ever have any confidence in me again, for I have none in myself. But I would not now consent to your putting any capital into anything for me, unless it was under your own eye and you knew all of the circumstances. However, I do not hope for any more chances. I am a man without hope, miserable and broken, wretched and ill, and pray God daily like Elijah, Lord, take away my life. For he knows I am an unprofitable servant, but I am worse off than he was, for he had nae children, nae bairns. He then gets a response from Birmingham from his dad informing him to stay put and not to abandon his wife and child, as he's sending him 2 ton in the post to see him through. He then replies to his dad and tells him how he believes his mother has been sending literal hate mail. Not his mother, actually, no, Marjorie. How he believes that Marjorie's mother has been sending literal hate mail, except instead of sending it to Edward Wilson and Marjorie Wilson, he believes that she's actually been writing these letters out, handwriting them and sending them to other people in order to spread the hate for him. And then he ends up leaving Marjorie and the kids, because Marjorie wouldn't let him take his son with him, which seems an odd reason to break up with your wife, because if you're going to leave your wife on the other side of the earth back in the 1900s, and you're going to get a boat and take one child away from her and then say, well, actually, I'd rather have that child there, she's like, but you're leaving me here either way, that's when you've left your wife, really. But still, she wouldn't let him take his son with him, so he left her. Which bizarre, weird mentality. And his son later ended up ill. His son was called Rupert, I think. I'm pretty sure it was Rupert. And yeah, he ended up pretty ill, and Marjorie refused to tell him, at least according to Wilson. He actually found out that that the kid had been ill through the landlord, because he bumped into the landlord, and the landlord asked him, how's your son doing? And that's how he found out his son had been ill, because she wouldn't let him see his son. So it's weird to see that she wouldn't let him see his son, and that's something that's been going on for a good few, at least 100 years. Anyway, then his life starts to take a weird bit of a turn again, and he turns to theosophy. at this point, which isn't it's not a huge jump really, because he already believed in the second coming of Jesus because his religious standpoint and the religion he was a part of, which I fucking can't remember the name of, and because of that religion though, he believed that Jesus was actually due at any minute now, and he just needed to accept. In order to become a theosophite, he needed to accept the theosophical belief that Jesus wasn't the literal Son of God, was instead he was just a normal lad, Jesus, until he was baptized, and then that's what turned him into this person that was able to channel the powers of God, or of a God. It's not much of a leap, but it's still a bit of a leap, but a bit of a logical leap, maybe. I mean, you could step into it, though, I guess, but if you already believe one, why wouldn't you believe the other? Because, I mean, if you can believe that a woman can be impregnated by an ethereal entity called fucking Gabriel on behalf of a much more powerful entity, then it's... and that fucking bigger, more powerful entity is literally capable of physically anything at all that's possible in the universe, but it can't impregnate this virginal woman, Mary. Then it can't be too much of a jump to believe that she was actually just impregnated by her other half, Joseph, from him slipping one up 9 months before the census was due in Bethlehem. I mean, one's actually a lot easier to believe, realistically. Anyway, after entering into the world of theosophy on the 6th of January 1913, he seemed to spend about 12 years, which again, 12, 11, these numbers repeat. This happened in 1913. He was ill for 11 years. He spent 12 years going about round the world, and in this 12 years, right, he went through various trials and problems, which you could see in a way as well the hero's journey. I think there's 12 steps in there to the hero's journey, and Hercules and the 12 something or other. So this number's important, and he obviously knows this, or whoever's trying to perpetuate his story to the world knows this. Now, after reading from those letters from him when he was younger, I find it some of them weren't very nice, because you're thinking, this guy's life's been fucking shit here. And I can't imagine things got much worse for him through these trials and problems. Realistically, it was probably just more of the same, except now he's taking more of an avid interest in it rather than trying to focus on selling new rope, which was a new thing for the time, and focusing on his wife that probably hated every moment of the time with him. In this time, though, within this 12 years, he ended up in America, and then he ended up in Canada, which he seemed to stick at for quite a while. But in between that, he had a myriad of jobs through it all, and more clerical work, administrative work. He worked on boats for a while. He was a ranch hand for a bit, and then somehow he managed to wangle the job of a pilot. And now I know people say it was a different time back then, but that's normally used to sort of explain away fucking domestic abuse and sexual harassment. A plane's always been a fucking plane, and it's an expensive bit of kit, right? A plane that you would assume the owner would want to ensure the longevity of, because it's an investment, but obviously not, the 1900s, the early 1900s at the very least. Very different time, people just throwing planes around all over the place. It seems like they just fucking let anyone have a go after reading this. I mean, saying that though, it probably wasn't up until, even up until 9/11, they used to let you go and have a look around the cockpit in it, and you could see the buttons, you could fucking jeer the pilot if you wanted to, whilst you fucking shared a cig with him and a glass of whiskey with them. So maybe people did see planes differently back then, didn't see them as, fucking dangerous things. Anyway, let's have a song. This is Guess Again by Rain, Fat PM, Illa Tease, Mike Righteous and Amina El Kindi. Whilst he was getting about on his jollies round the world, he ended up in France, and on the 19th of October 1924, he had what he calls a visitation, right? Or at the very least, we'd all call it a vision of sorts, because he didn't see a person, an angel, or even a grey alien like fucking Aleister Crowley did. It was an object that was known as an Ankh, Ankh, if you want to give that a quick Google. Give it a moment to, go to Google. That was Ankh. And it's that ancient Egyptian cross that kind of resembles a crucifix crossed with the Jesus fish, which may be where the Jesus fish comes from, might come from the Ankh, I'm not sure. Think of your regular crucifix. Actually, now think about, when you go to church as a kid for fucking Palm Sunday, and you make them crucifixes out of palm leaves, right? Imagine if you, at the top of the crucifix, you open up the palm leaves and you've got that sort of, that slit, that hole. It's kind of like that, I guess. That would be the best way to describe it. Like a tight loop almost at the top quarter of a crucifix. If you imagine each part of the crucifix as quarters, the bit on the left, the bit on the right, the bit at the top and the bit at the bottom, even though they're all different, well, there's 3 different sizes there. It's also, weirdly, the crucifix folds into a perfect cube. So maybe the aliens used to come here, who was Jesus, used to visit here in a cube, and that cube would open up. Maybe the cube folded up around Jesus and he ascended up to what we called heaven in the Bible, but realistically he was just in a cube that would spin so fast it would, I don't know. Anyway, fucking nothing to do with this, and that's definitely not in my notes, and we will get stuck down a hole and I will not be able to get back to this. So the Ankh was like I said, the ancient Egyptian cross that kind of looked like a crucifix with the fucking sort of like a hole at the top. Anyway, this vision, this all happened whilst he was experiencing falling into trances, he describes them as. But this could have been his tuberculosis. He could have been just ill, really ill, and bedridden, rather than it being a trance. But you could believe that. But in the times when he was in his trances, this is where he would write his manifestos and his spiritual texts. Texts like the 3 Truths, which I'm guessing the 3 Truths were adapted for American culture. I'm guessing, they were the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, I would imagine, but I haven't read it. He's also wrote this other one, which I remember it was referred to as notable, but I haven't actually made a note of it, which is stupid of me. I really thought I'd remembered it. I must have done. But what I have made a note of, though, is some of the message that the Ankh itself gave him. Thou who hast worn the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, of the high knowledge and of the low, humble thyself, La. Prepare thy heart, for the mighty ones have need of thee. Thou shalt rebuild, thou shalt restore. Therefore prepare thy mind for that which shall illumine thee. He also learned here in this vision that he was the reincarnation of the Pharaoh Akhenaten. And interestingly as well, it kind of makes sense, because the Ankh itself is the symbol of eternal life, but in Christianity it is also the symbol of death in a way, because, like 3 days later Jesus was on that cross, and then 3 days later he woke up in a cave and he walked it off. So it's also almost kind of, in a way, still it's about eternal life, which is weird, but also very, very, very much about death. And it's also known as the key of life. So maybe the key was turned by the spirit of the ancient Pharaoh, who used it to access the vessel, or what the Theosophites would describe as a vehicle. They'd call the bodies a vehicle, but as I say, to the uninitiated, it would just be a bloke's body. And it was because of this ethereal interaction as well that he started to believe that he was the conduit for the so-called 12th brother, which I can only presume was one of the masters that gets referenced in Theosophy, but I could be wrong. I've still not read into Theosophy properly, because there's a lot. There's a lot you could go at with it, so I haven't got there yet. But we will get there. Side note, I'm actually thinking about doing some episodes about different pantheons of gods, because I thought that might be fun, Anyway, as with most cult leaders, there seems to be somewhat of a grey area where there's very little known about them and about their lives and that. And that's the time of his life that we're going to skip out on as well. Because I could, make bits up, but we all seem to know that he travelled around fucking evangelising for this so-called Aquarian Foundation that he made, which he named that because of the theosophical belief of humanity being able to soon enter into the age of Aquarius. And it seems that all the people involved with the Theosophical Society had huge influences over the Western world as well. And I'm not sure if that's the same as how Russia today, in more recent times, has a huge influence over the Western world through the alleged ownership of our educational system. So I don't know there. I don't know if it's just the same conspiracy. I also think that there are all these people that did exist back then who were involved in Theosophy, who they were fucking clever, innit? And they seemed to be very aware of the world, either due to their travels or because they were well read, which weirdly goes against the belief of what we'll now refer to as Brother 12. He's no longer Edward Wilson, he's now Brother 12. He didn't link that people should read because the mind shouldn't be tainted, and that by reading and learning would also in some hinder the enlightenment of the people of the world, who he sought to protect in his own weird little way. But could this acute awareness of the world and society as a whole have just been interpreted through this unusual belief system, when in actual fact what they may have been physically sensing, either psychically or whatever, or witnessing in the changing of text and in the transference of information from one country to another as they travelled, could they have just been somehow aware of the approach of World War II? Because that's got to be possible, that's got to be a possibility. All these people were like, the end is nigh and the apocalypse is coming, horrendous stuff is about to happen, and then World War II happened. So did they know that that was on the cards, but didn't think it would be that? They thought it would be the end of everything, kind of thing. Which in a way I guess it kind of was, because society in the world changed massively after it, just like it did after World War One. Anyway, this Aquarian Foundation was mostly just a commune at the start, and it seems it was like a very fucking forward-thinking one as well, though, because Brother 12 seemed to mostly hire women. So it would be very accepted in the modern world today, because it's on the right edge of sexism. It's on the right side of it. Not in the political sense of right or left, I honestly don't understand any of that, but it's the right type of sexist. All these women as well were given free on-the-job training in firearm technique. They would then patrol the land that was owned by Brother 12 in order to defend it against any intruders or any perceived threats. This land that he owned as well was an island. It was about 150 acres or so, and it was mostly one island, but I think he had a bit of another neighbouring island as well. It was just off the coast of Canada, northeast Canada, I think, going off what I can remember from the map I looked at. Now, at any one time on this island, there was approximately a dozen people living there. But if you remember from earlier, right, that 11 keeps popping up in the story of this guy's life. So if it was only approximately 12 people, and, cast your head back as well to other episodes, you'll remember the importance of the number 12 and the number 13 and other things. So there seems to be some leniency in the magic world pertaining to about a dozen. The lives of this possible baker's dozen, though, didn't come cheap, despite what the brainwashing by Steve Martin would have you believe. So the commune was funded by around 8,000 people to make it viable as a business, as a thing that could happen, right? Some of these people would send $5 frequently, and others, like a lady called Mary Connolly, would be sending a fair few £1,000s at a time, and dollars at a time, This was a woman as well that would defend Brother 12 in court until it no longer suited her to do that, which seems to be the depressing thing about being a cult leader as well. It's one of the things that puts it off it, innit? Because all these people pin their hopes and dreams onto you, the cult leader. And then when they realise that they've done that and you're not actually Superman, or in this case, you're not actually Osiris from ancient Egyptian lore, they turn on you. And they label you a bad guy, they label you a dickhead, they label you as a nutter, dangerous. But if you've brought hope and joy, right, to thousands of people all around the world for so long, can you really be that bad of a person? Because what's the difference between a cult leader, priests, bishops, the Pope at a Catholic church, the mob, the leader of a country? They all do all of that for a lot of people, but also instill fear for a lot of other people, the opposite of it. So I'm thinking it's just a matter of scale, innit? Your average cult leader has a couple hundred people, let's say, that they can directly influence, and even if you get a couple of diehard supporters, that are with you to the very end, they fucking full-on Marshall Applewhite with you, and fucking they drink the poison with you, and they've gone to the end. Now, it's easy to turn a couple hundred people against yourself, really easy. Whereas on the larger scale, on the international scale, let's say, you're not just dealing with a couple dozen like-minded people. So I guess that's why people aren't trying to sue the Pope for the money that they chucked into a basket 25 years ago, because they've changed their mind on they've changed their religious outlook on life, so they no longer believe that they should have given that money to the Pope, and They want that money back. They want that £2.50 that they put in a basket over a month period where they went to the fucking church for a while. Never happens. I've never heard of that happening. Maybe it does, but I've never heard of it. Anyway, I mentioned Osiris a minute ago, and that's because Brother 12 managed to convince a lady by the name of Myrtle Baumgartner that she was in fact Isis in human form, and that he himself was Osiris. And now, for those of you that don't know, this is why I want to do a Pantheon of Gods episode, well, a few episodes. Osiris and Isis were like the head gods of ancient Egypt mythology, and Isis being the lady god, Osiris being the male god. Anyway, he convinced Myrtle that he and her should work together for the sake of humanity, and try to make Horus come back to life, get the fucking team back together. And Horus, for those of you again that don't know, is the equivalent of the ancient Egyptian Jesus. He's the sun god. He was the son of Osiris. Now there is a slim chance here as well, bit dark, but there's a slim chance that Brother 12's magical powers could have been slightly off here. Or, on the converse of that, he could have actually been some form of god in human form, because... Now, hear me out here. Let me explain this a little bit first, because this could sound awful. The reason why Angel Gabriel forced himself onto the Virgin Mary was because Mary wouldn't be able to withstand the semen of God, right? So he had to channel his holy seed, let's keep it biblical, his holy seed through the tip of the penis of the angel Gabriel, so that he could horse one up Mary and make Mary pop out Jesus 9 months later in a completely different town after a donkey ride to somewhere else. Now, if that's the reason why God couldn't have a child with a woman, a human woman, could that be why this next bit happened? Was Brother 12 actually a god or a deity or something like that in human form, or using a human vessel for his own will? Because Myrtle eventually had a nervous breakdown after succumbing to a fucking load of miscarriages, apparently, in the attempts to create Horus for Osiris, otherwise known as Brother 12. Horus being the Egyptian sun god. So maybe it could mean that Brother 12 was able to spot something different in Myrtle compared to everyone else, in the sense of maybe he was like, like them dogs that can supposedly sniff out cancer. Maybe Brother 12 had a sort of power where he was able to pick a possible illness, or I don't know, some form of chemical deficiency or something that stopped a child from reaching full term inside of Myrtle's womb. I don't actually know how miscarriages come about, I'm just sort of spitballing, but could it actually be as well, though, as I say, that he was Osiris, he was a god, or at least a lesser deity or higher being, and his semen was just simply poison or dangerous for Myrtle's very fucking human eggs, and Myrtle wasn't actually Isis? Maybe he got his wires crossed and someone else on the encampment was Isis. Don't know. As a quick aside, though, to get us away from the dead baby talk, I'm sure I read that Osiris and Isis are the representation of the earth and the sky. So if that's true, that means that one of them, so Osiris, let's say, is the earth and Isis is the sky, just for one example of it. It could also be the other way around, I can't remember. So what if that's what ISIS, the terrorist organisation, is in the eyes of the mainstream media, and that's why they're called ISIS? A way to turn people against the god of the earth or the god of the sky. Let's say these multiple gods are real, and we've all been convinced that there's only one god. As Catholics, we believe there's only one god. We don't believe in the god of the earth, the god of the sky, and the god of water, and all the rest. So what if there is, and by turning us against something that's called ISIS, and we all no one's for ISIS, are they? No one's keen on that, really. We go against that. Now, if that's a way to turn us against this particular god that used to exist, or used to be called that, but still exists, but albeit maybe by a different name, either by adding to industrialisation and the destruction of the earth, or taking the powers of the earth god away by doing that, or by turning people against the god of the sky or the god of space, and in turn making people subconsciously threatened by space aliens in the back of their head when it becomes time to turn the drones on, that we saw in the Tokyo Olympics, and they can play out Werner von Braun's fake alien invasion or fake meteorite. Anyway, Let's have a song. This is XII, Holier Than Thou. Some of you obviously don't know because I can see how many people listen to the show, so I thought I'd let you know about my other show. I've got another podcast now called Truth Seek, and it's me and a comedian called Jimmy Budd, and we talk about different conspiracies. If you imagine this, except there's another person kind of reining me in and keeping me kind of on track. And also cracking jokes as well. It's funny, mate. Like Jimmy makes me laugh, I make Jimmy laugh, and hopefully it will make you laugh and all. So that's Truth Seeking. You'll probably be able to find it through one of the links underneath. Please give it a listen and go and give Jimmy a follow on Instagram and let him know what you think of the shows. I'll let you crack on with this though for now. Maybe Brother 12 was aware of Wernher von Braun, because I'm pretty sure some of these people were reading at least some of the same books on possibly star charts as well. But Wernher von Braun wanted to pretend the end was nigh. He wanted to pretend, whereas Edward genuinely fucking believed the apocalypse was coming. So he was trying to ready himself for it. And one of the best ways to ready yourself for the apocalypse, right, is to hoard gold. Specifically, $20 blocks worth in glass jars. Gold seems like it would be a completely irrelevant thing in a post-apocalyptic world. No one needs it. Why do you want a shiny metal then? What good's it going to do you? Now I know it's very conductive and it's good for antibacterial stuff and things like that, but in a chunk, what can you do? It's a weapon. I suppose it's a kind of a weapon. But other than that, what can you do with it? Now, could it be that Brother 12 was... I called him Edward a minute ago. I do apologise, guys. I've not stuck to it. He's Brother 12. He's not Edward again. He's still Brother 12. He's always going to be Brother 12 now. He doesn't turn back. He doesn't transform back from the channeling the Pharaoh back to Edward. It doesn't happen. But could it have been that Brother 12 was actually very aware of the Anunnaki? Could the Nazis have also been scared of the Anunnaki, and that's why they wanted to hoard gold for their return, in order to possibly survive the next cataclysm caused by them? Maybe Brother 12 was hoping to pay off Enki, Enlil and their whole entourage in the hopes of his heavily fortified island paradise in the cold Canadian coast being left alone by them. Now, some people have come out and said that Brother 12 had various superpowers as well. So maybe he didn't need to depend on the gold to win the Anunnaki over. Maybe he would have been able to defeat them in a sort of mind-powered Mortal Kombat arena. One of his superpowers is detailed as being able to instinctively know what a person desires from another person in their own personal, interpersonal relationships, and being able to display that to them like a chameleon in order to be able to get money out of them or to otherwise hold influence over them. Now, I'll talk about his other superpowers a little bit later on. Getting towards the end of the cult's lifespan of around 3 years, a woman joined with the self-appointed nickname of Madam Z. And if we've learned anything through these shows, it's never trust a person who gives themselves a nickname, innit? There's a reason that they've changed the name, and there's probably a reason why no one else has given them a nickname in their life as well. Madam Z decided to take it upon herself to spice things up a bit in there, on this 150-acre island of a dozen people, where she could have just lived the life of Riley and ignored people. It's worth saying as well, she was actually Brother 12's mistress, or at least one of them. But in her eyes, the cult was a little bit too friendly, and what it needed was a bit of terror. Shake things up a bit, kidnap a person, lock him in a cellar, that type of carry-on. And that's exactly what her and Brother 12 did. They trapped one member of the cult, of the group. Let's call them a group. One member of this very forward-thinking group. They imprisoned him in a cellar on the island for what I think I read was about a week. And then that bloke managed to escape, and he fled the heavily fortified island. And he rode a little over 12 miles. Now, when I say rode, I don't mean he rode a bike. I mean he rode, as in like fucking, he rode. Like what posh people do at universities near London, where they go in the river and they row against each other. Row? I don't know how to... With oars, where they're throwing fucking rocks at each other's heads. Fucking rowing. Like rowing boats. He rowed a rowing boat. What's it fucking not called a rowing boat? Oh, bollocks. It sounds Canadian. The word sounds Canadian. Canoe! I think it was a canoe. He rowed a canoe. a little over 10 miles to a Canadian place called Nanaimo on mainland Canada in order to try and get help from the local police force there, and the police just sort of shunned him away. Didn't help, surprisingly. They wanted nothing to do with this. The local, which I imagine would be a very small local police force, thought to themselves, yeah, this island here full of mental women and a man with superpowers, aye. A massive island full of guns, heavily fortified, you say? Yeah. No, we're alright. You know, they did the logical thing. We'd all do the same, I'm sure. Anyway, Madam Z was proper into these, I think she called them tests of endurance, and she seemed to force Brother 12 into taking up his own test as well, albeit I don't think he knew. She cultured a sense of paranoia in Brother 12, and a place that was a place that seemed like it was a lovely place to live, where you could, raise a family of children and keep them safe from popular culture to enable them to then go on to become the enlightened fucking spiritual leaders of the future. A place where, if you behaved well and followed the rules, you were gifted your own cabin to sleep in that was dry. A place where people from all over North America were happy to send their hard-earned money to, for little to nothing in return, not even a letter. Well, that place, because of Madam Z, became a place of torture and misery, mostly because of the paranoia instilled in Brother 12 by the so-called mysterious Madam Z. After abusing cult members started to become normalised, a lot of benefactors began to drop out, which is nice, They didn't want this happening to the people that were being imprisoned there. The dozen or so inhabitants of the island as well, they decided against being beaten and imprisoned, so they started to leave, and they let them leave. It's not like other cults where they're like, you've got to stay here. Where do you think you're going? Come back here, cut your balls off. Show me you're serious. I know you want to leave, but if you cut your balls off, you'll have to stay, because I'll have to look after you, so come on, let me look after you. Chop your balls off. Come here. No, come back. Come here. Come sit on my knee. Good girl, come on, sit here. I'm going to whip your clit off, because that's what's driving you mental, isn't it? Just like I did with Ray, over there. Whipped his dick and balls off. He's great now, aren't you, Ray? You alright, Ray? I pissed through a hole. He's alright, he's still on the meds. We'll have to get him off them, though, because it's going to interfere with the cyanide. He'd probably survive and be a vegetable for the rest of his life, and we can't have that. He could talk, But anyway, these they let them leave is the point, which is quite nice. But by letting them leave, and maybe this is what other cult leaders learnt. Maybe other cult leaders learnt from Brother 12, because Brother 12 let them leave the island, and instead of them just going, oh, fucking hell, that was mad, what was I doing there? They started taking him to court for embezzlement of funds. Which I suppose embezzlement can only ever be of funds, but I've wrote embezzlement of funds down here, so for embezzlement. Initially, though, the benefactor, who's one of the main benefactors that we spoke of earlier on, Mary Connolly, she initially refuted the idea that her donation was embezzled by Brother 12. She claimed that the money that she gave to Brother 12 was actually just a personal gift, and this from her was enough, because she was a socialite. She was quite a big name apparently at the time. This was enough to end the court proceedings there, stopped it dead, didn't carry on, nothing, no one got money back, fuck all, because she spoke out. But even then, eventually she turned sour and decided to sue him, and in the last court case that I could find a note of, things started to get a bit weird, and Brother 12 started to exhibit his superpowers to the unsuspecting public. But by this point, he'd started to build a bit of a reputation throughout the whole continent of North America. He'd warned the world against the monopolies of the time, telling anyone that would listen, that they're going to become bigger and they'll eventually begin to control every aspect of each of our lives. He claimed the media was constantly lying about the true state of affairs around the world, which does in itself add to my idea of the smarter, more travelled people of the world being able to fucking literally smell World War II around the corner. He also warned, right, of the invisible hand, what here on Pause for Thought, the world around you, what we call the big they, He warned of this invisible hand, the big they, an unseen force controlling the world, every decision made by people in what were perceived powerful positions of the world and of manufacturing. He warned against that, mate. And I've got a little quote from him here. Slipping, or awaken. You are the chained victims of this fearful thing, invisible control. No president is ever elected or king crowned. No treaty ever signed or army moved, unless it be at the bidding, or at least with the knowledge and consent of this unseen power, which controls prince, president, and peasant alike. He also had meetings, what he would describe as positive dealings with the KKK. And there hasn't been any indication in what I've read that Brother 12, or in fact when he was Edward Wilson, no indication at all that he was a racist man as such. He comes across as quite a caring and considerate person in his earlier years from the letters I was reading. A bit selfish, but still. He was in his 20s, I'm in my 20s, I'm a bit selfish, people are selfish. But he didn't come across as racist or out like that, innit? So this baffled me a bit, so I looked into it a little bit. Now, his problem wasn't with any people of a particular colour. He wasn't bothered by black people or any a particular race or out like that. His problem was with the Roman Catholics. Now, on paper, apparently I'm a Roman Catholic. I was baptised into the Roman Catholic Church, so he would have a problem with me. Namely, though, he had a problem with the Pope and a political candidate at the time of America that would have simply acted as a puppet for the Pope of the time, at least according to Brother 12's beliefs. And the KKK seemed to believe this too at the time, and maybe, as well, they were right to be cautious of the Roman Catholics, because it's widely known, or at least widely accepted, that they sort of gave it's like an unconscious nod to the Nazis during World War II, as if to go, okay, go to war, kind of thing, and there's record as well, supposedly, allegedly, of them working with the mafia and all to be able to ship weapons to between America and Italy. Something I read quite a while ago. Whether it's all true, don't know, but still, it's accepted by people. Now, Brother 12's goal wasn't to become a fascist or to eradicate a race of people either, from what I can tell from what I've looked at. He just wanted there to be a third party that people could vote for in America, and he campaigned for it as well, even to the point where he got an audience with Congress as well, and I think, and there was a congressman, or maybe two congressmen that were backing the idea, but it turned out that the congressman had used Brother 12's idea and him and his weight behind him and his money in order for them to help Hoover to get to the Oval Office or to remain as president. I can't remember the years of it. Anyway, let's have a song. This is Don't Forget by Atmosphere. One ex-member of the Aquarium Foundation claims that Brother 12 would use black magic to assassinate his detractors and influence people that went against him. Now that sounds like someone that's been manipulated by a cult leader. That sounds exactly like one of those sorts of things those people would say. Until you actually hear about what happened at his final court case before Brother 12's death. Allegedly, he was able to use his superpowers to make, and to keep making the jury members ill, and he made attorneys faint almost on command, and he was also somehow able to make the judge himself start growling like a dog. Now that's not something a regular man could do. I couldn't do that. I don't know anyone that could do those things. That's something that only the reincarnated spirit of an ancient pharaoh could do, in my opinion. I'll hold my hands up, in my opinion. Now, what happened after this is where the real mystery lies. People believe, there's another mystery, no one knows where all the gold went, but the real mystery is people believe that he faked his own death in Switzerland because his death certificate was signed by a doctor who was also a member of the Aquarium Foundation whilst it was still functioning. Now his death, Brother 12's death came about in 1934, just before World War II. Some people say he fled back to England, to his home of Birmingham. Others say he fled to San Francisco. He was apparently an extremely wealthy man by this point in his life though, but also very clearly riddled with some form of debilitating illness that seemed to possibly infect all of those around him. Although his granddad, though, was a master inventor. So could the Wilson family be responsible for America's heart attack gun and the alleged cancer weapons? Is that why he couldn't conceive with Myrtle? He'd been testing these cancer weapons and stuff, and he'd become infertile, and he made her possibly infertile by infecting her with the heart attack weapon and the cancer guns and stuff. Because Myrtle was the reincarnation of Isis, if you remember, and he still stopped her from being able to give birth to Horus. Is that why his children got poorly? Is that why people started to think he had superpowers? Or was he simply a man who fulfilled a role for the invisible hand, the big they, and upon completion of his job, he was allowed passage out of this world, like Truman in The Truman Show, allowing him to keep safe from the bombing raids of World War II, or perhaps allowing him to go back to his own time of 1300 BC during the 18th dynasty of ancient Egypt, which of course back then would have been known simply to the locals as Egypt. We may never know. And that's all we've got time for this week, guys. Later on tonight, we've got Jim'll Mix It at 7. And then me and Jimmy Budd are back tomorrow with an episode of Truth Seeking live at 7 PM. I'll fucking see yous in a bit, mate.
Thanks for listening, man. I won't take up too much of the time because it's over, and hopefully you're listening to all of these one after the other. Or on repeat, maybe the same episode on repeat. But fucking... leave us a review if you can, mate. Fucking share it with a mate. Send it to your nana. I don't mind where you send it to, but if you get more people listening to it, thank you. If you did enjoy it though, fucking join the Patreon, mate. www.patreon.com/worldaroundyou. There'll be a link in one of the links in the description, I would imagine, of the one you're listening to. You can join for £1, $5, and you get access to all the video versions of these. You'll end up about 4 or 5 episodes ahead as well through Patreon, and you get access to some of my books as well, and a little discount code for some of the canvases as well. But even if you don't join that, fucking thanks for listening to it, mate. I hope you enjoyed it. Hopefully, here's the next one.